How's it going, everybody? This is Jay Williamson with Miner Network. We have our first annual job career talk with Chief Brian Manley of the Austin PD. So to give a quick little intro before we get started, he joined in 1990. He's been the police chief of Austin since June of 2018. And to kind of get a little breakdown about APD, they have over 2,500 sworn law enforcement and support personnel, as well as a budget of over $400 million. He was recently named a Fortune 50 greatest leader in the United States. So I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting stuff to be able to say. And so we're going to get started with our first question, which is basically just talk about how you got your start and why you decided to become a police officer.
Jay, this for me started, believe it or not, in high school. I was a junior in high school, and I took a course called street law. It sounded interesting. It was a study of law enforcement at the local, state, and federal level. And I didn't have any aspirations at that point of being a police officer. It just had been noted as a good class to take. So that was my first exposure to law enforcement. It is traditionally a family business. I'm the first in my family and only in my family to join law enforcement. So through that course, I learned about law enforcement, but what was probably the turning point for me was doing a ride along with an Austin police officer. So here I found myself one weekend night as a junior in high school, going out with an Austin police officer on patrol, and spending that 10 hours with that officer set me on this path to become a police officer. I saw what the job entailed and what kind of life it would be and what you would be able to do and help in your community, and never looked back.
Right. So then I think you started right when you were a junior in college, right? Is that when you went to the academy, or what was that process like? How did that work?
Yeah, so I actually went to the University of Texas here in Austin, and I was actually studying, my degree is in finance, and that was intentional. I knew I wanted to go into law enforcement, but law enforcement is a career where you can get injured and potentially have a career-ending injury, or in case I just had a change of heart at some point down the road, I wanted to have a degree in something different so that I would have other opportunities if that ever happened. So I was roughly 16 hours short of graduating with my finance degree when I got my offer for hire from the Austin Police Department. So I actually stopped going to college, went over to the police academy, completed the police academy, and then completed my probationary period on patrol, and then immediately returned back to UT to finish my degree.
Yeah. And so can you talk a little bit about what the academy process is like, getting accepted into the academy, and from there kind of what the stages that you go through before you become an official police officer?
Sure. And first and foremost, whether it's the Austin Police Department or most police departments I know, it is a very rigorous vetting that you will go through to be a police officer. And again, when you're going to be given such awesome responsibility and authority, it is important that we make sure we're only bringing the right men and women into this profession. So for the Austin Police Department, your process will start with having a recruiter assigned to you. You'll fill out a very lengthy application. We're going to want to know everything about the men and women who apply here, everything about your schooling, your friends, previous employment, your credit history, your driving history. We will ask you about everything. Throughout the recruiting process, you'll do that background information packet. You will do a physical fitness test to make sure that you have all of the physical fitness attributes that are important. We're also going to give you a mental health assessment, a psychological evaluation. You will have medical evaluation. You will have a polygraph exam to ensure that everything you've told us along the way is true and accurate. And then you will go through what we call an oral board, where you will come in and you'll sit down with a panel of current Austin police officers and supervisors that will ask you questions about you and your history. They'll put you in situations to kind of get an idea of how you would respond. And if you get through all of that, and about 1 in 8 to 1 in 10 get through the process and enter the Austin Police Academy. It is a 32-week academy and 8 months of very intensive training. The training consists of a lot of studying. If you think about it, a police officer has to know almost as much about the law as lawyers do. They don't have to understand the courtroom process as much, but you have to have a full understanding of penal code, traffic code, health code, code of criminal procedure, city ordinance. So a lot of classroom training. And then we have a lot of training for the other skills that are required for policing, such as defensive tactics, firearms training, crisis communication. So I'm giving you the real short version here, but there's a tremendous amount of training that you will go through in the academy, driving training as well. And then at the culmination of your 32 weeks, assuming you have passed everything and made it to graduation, you will then graduate and be a fully commissioned police officer and enter the next phase of your training.
Right.
And that's the field training program, where you'll be assigned to a senior police officer, and you'll spend 3 months riding with that officer as you gradually begin to take over and do more and more of the work under the observation and supervision of that officer. And then at that point, you'll be cut loose and you'll be on your own as a single officer unit patrolling in Austin.
So how has the academy process changed since when you went to the academy to today?
A significant change has been the length. When I went through the police academy, it was 6 months, and it's now 8 months.
Gotcha.
I've been in the department for 30 years now, so you can imagine there's been a lot of advances in policing and a lot of advances in technology. So there's a lot of curriculum that the officers go through now as far as utilizing technology. You get in a police car nowadays, and it's like getting in the cockpit of a fighter jet from 30 years ago, right? The technology has advanced so much.
Mm-hmm.
My first police car, there was no computer in it. There was no prisoner partition. The prisoner sat in the front seat with you. The dispatcher would give you a call. You would write it down, pull out your map, and then you would figure out where you're going. So a lot of change. There's a lot of things that also, the importance of communication skills, de-escalation, community involvement, because we've had so much advancing in policing over the past 30 years where we're so much into community policing now. And so a lot of the training is geared towards being culturally competent, understanding your community so that you're applying the law fairly and impartially and in a way and manner your community expects you to.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So what is like the typical day for an officer look like, and what does a typical day for you look like?
Typical day for the officer, you know what, if you ask an officer, they would tell you there's no typical day, because you never know what that first call is going to be for the day, and you never know what that next call is going to be for the day. And I think that's some of the draw of the job, is there's no 2 days that will ever be the same. You'll have opportunities to go see people on the worst day of their life and to be that one person that can make a difference in that moment. You'll have those very rare calls, although they're the ones you always see in the movies and TVs where the adrenaline's pumping and things are happening really fast. A lot of law enforcement, a lot of modern policing is really service oriented and helping people. So the average day of an officer, you'll show up, you'll go to your pre-shift briefing, check out your car, go on patrol, and you'll respond to radio calls for service. And then when you're not on a call for service, you'll look for some proactive things to do with the community, hopefully building relationships, doing crime prevention strategies, things like that. Now, the promotional system, the next rank you would have is a detective. So we have a large detective cadre here at the Austin Police Department. Their day is very different. They're going to be in plain clothes. They're going to come in and they're going to carry a caseload. If you work in the child abuse unit, you're going to come in, and that day you will have gotten assigned to new child abuse cases, whether it's physical or sexual abuse of children, and you'll begin investigating those cases. And those investigations, as you would imagine, could last a week or two or many months, depending upon how complex they are. We've got investigators across all the disciplines. We have robbery, homicide, sex crimes, all of those different bureaus. So their day is very much spent doing computer research, looking for evidence, putting together probable cause affidavits, search warrant affidavits, all of the like. A typical day for me, you said at the beginning of this, it's like being the CEO of a $400 million corporation, right? I've got to deal with human resource issues. I've got to deal with supply issues. And so my day really is a lot of meetings with community leaders, meetings with city leaders, dealing with policy issues, handling those crisis events that come up. Very different than being the officer on the street that is doing the job. My role and my executive team is really tasked with making sure they have all the tools necessary to do their job and to be successful.
Gotcha. What would you say is the most important thing that the regular person doesn't realize about police work?
It's a great question. And I like to highlight this. I think what sometimes gets lost in policing and in the relationships with police departments and the communities is that at the end of the day, that police officer that you met and maybe met in unfavorable circumstances,
Right.
they're going to go home and they're going to take the uniform off and they're going to put on their shorts and t-shirt or whatever they may put on, and they're going to be called dad,
Right.
husband, brother. So we all do so much outside of this, but we carry a lot of the responsibilities of the job home with us. So I just think it's important for people to realize that although police officers, when you encounter them in public and interact with them in public or in their official role, at the end of the day, they have the same wants and needs as everybody else.
Right.
And many of them play, a tremendous role as a family person and community member outside of the official role.
Yeah. So kind of like a little more lighthearted note, do you have like a funniest story or like best experiences when you were kind of coming up the ranks that you can remember off the top of your head? I know it's not great to be put on the spot sometimes, but
yeah, my goodness, now you're really
now you've
aging
probably got
too.
a lot of stories. So you probably have a lot to be able to tell.
There's a lot of stories that occur over the year because
Uh-huh.
policing is such that you find yourselves in so many unpredictable circumstances.
Right.
You have those embarrassing moments. And for me, fortunately, when I was coming up, we didn't wear body-worn cameras and have cameras in the car. So your blooper reel, per se, wasn't necessarily captured
Right.
for all to see.
Uh-huh.
But I've had my fair share of embarrassing moments, foot pursuits, chasing people where you lose your balance and fall down, or, maybe a crash here or there where you could have done something different. But it is definitely a career where you've got to be able to laugh at yourself at times because you're guaranteed to put yourself in some embarrassing circumstances at times.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier the different departments and how you become a detective after you're an officer. What is that how do they choose who goes to which different departments? Like, what does that screening process look like? How do you determine who's a detective in arson versus vice or something like that?
Sure. So for the Austin Police Department, you test to be a detective. And so there's a written test that you'll take. And then depending upon how you score, you'll be placed on a list. And then depending upon how many vacancies we have that year or two, it's a 2-year list typically. Then if your number comes up, then you're going to be promoted to a detective. So to get to the rank, it is a written test. So you do a lot of studying. We typically put out the list of study material 6 months in advance of the exam so that our candidates have plenty of time to study. And it is anywhere from 600 to 1,000 pages of material for those exams because, again, we want it to be competitive. And there's a lot that you need to learn as you move up the ranks. Now, your assignment once you promote is dependent upon a couple things. Number one, where do we have openings in the department at that moment? Obviously, if we're promoting somebody, that means somebody left the organization and there might have been some internal movement where other people moved positions. So part of it will be where is the need at that moment. Part of it is also what is the interest of that detective? What unit would they like to work in? And then also what skill set do they have? Sometimes we'll have detectives that have a very needed skill, whether it be speaking a second language or whether it be experiences they have prior to joining the police department that make them better suited to work as an investigator in one division versus another.
Gotcha. So that makes a lot of sense. Say you have an 18-year-old, Brian Manley today who wants to become a police officer. What advice do you give them on getting started with the process today? Just graduated from high school, for instance.
The first thing I would tell someone that has an interest in this career is get to know your local police department. Go and talk to them. See if they have volunteer opportunities where you can get inside that organization and understand the department, because police departments around this country operate differently and we have different cultures.
Right.
And so you want to make sure that it's a place that you're comfortable with, and then find a police department, if not yours, then another. We do it here. Do a ride along with a police officer. Do several ride alongs, because like we talked about, there's no average typical day for a police officer. Right. If your interest in this profession is because of what you've seen on TV or in the movies, then I'm sorry, but you've been sold a bill of goods that isn't going to be true, because that's not what the normal day for a police officer is. So get out there and experience it. And I would also encourage you to be socially active in your community. Show that you care about your community, because this is what used to be a job, now a profession that really, we're going to teach you all of those things, such as defensive tactics, the law, all the tactical stuff. but you have to have a heart to do this job. You have to have a desire and a passion to want to do this job, because if not, you will not make a career of it.
Right. And so, you mentioned getting to know people in the police department, stuff like that. So pretty much everyone, I think, is either familiar with someone or they see regular police officers all the time. But who are like the unsung heroes of the Austin Police Department and just police departments in general?
The unsung heroes are our civilian staff. You said it at the beginning that I've got 1,959 police officer positions in the Austin Police
Right.
Department, but I have 737 civilians that do so much behind the scenes that you may know they're there, but you really don't understand what they do.
Yeah.
We've got our whole 911 dispatch center. We've got a complete forensics lab. We've got crime victim service counselors that go out and counsel folks. We've got a tremendous amount of administrative staff. I've got crime analysts and research and planning. And so what typically the community sees from the police department is our forward-facing operations, and that is what the uniformed officers do. But behind the scenes, there are so many civilians that do so much. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it's important, especially given the purpose of these talks and the project is to see if people have an interest in this career. Just because you may not want to wear the uniform and the badge doesn't mean a police department might not be the right place for you, because there are so many other jobs that are essential to a successful police department and still give you the satisfaction of serving your community.
So what does that process look like then on the civilian side? There's not really, like, there's so many different professions you already mentioned along the civilian side. Is it based on like your major in college potentially? Like, how do you get plugged into those civilian side positions?
So it depends on the specific job that you're going for. Some civilian jobs will have educational requirements. If you want to, say, be a crime scene technician, then we're going to want to hire you in typically as a property crime technician first, and then you work your way towards a major crime investigator.
Gotcha.
And so there will be many of our people that we hire into those positions actually have a forensics degree from a 4-year college.
Gotcha.
If you want to be hired into our crime analysis research and planning unit, many of our people that work in those divisions have degrees either in statistics and mathematics or in the crime analysis field. Many actually come from the military, where they performed similar functions in the military. But then we have a lot of employees that actually sign on not having gone to college. They've joined us right out of the ranks of high school, typically in the administrative field, but then you have the opportunity to move around or move up in the organization as well. So for those interested, I would just encourage you to go to the City of Austin's website and look for the job openings in the police department. And I can't think of a day that you would look there and there won't be a job open. It might not be the job that's right for you, but keep looking.
Mm-hmm. And your own personal life, what have you found has been like the most rewarding, part of being a police officer when you look back on your illustrious career as 50 greatest leaders in the United States and so on and so forth?
You're going to keep bringing that up, huh? When I talk about my career, I've really had a blessed career. I've had a lot of opportunities to work in a lot of different units, and I don't want to give you a verbal resume because that doesn't benefit anybody. But I think part of it, when I talk to people who are interested in this job, it's the ability to help others in their moment of need.
Yeah.
And in my many years here, the one assignment that I had that I know whenever I'm done with policing and I look back at my career, that I will always believe that's the area where I made the greatest impact, the greatest difference, and helped the most people, was the 5 years I spent in child abuse, investigating physical and sexual abuse of children, and then going back and supervising the unit, because those truly are some of the most vulnerable in our community. And unfortunately, you see human depravity at its worst when you see what people will do to children, their children or others. And so knowing that you had a hand in getting that child out of an abusive situation, whether it be physical abuse in the home, sexual abuse in the home, or outside, knowing that you've done something to better their life, that's what I will always remember as being the most impactful. Yeah. Now, the most fun was probably my early days on when I was on patrol. Right. And then I also worked in a street narcotics unit back in the early 90s when crack cocaine was really the big thing here in Austin. And it was on every street corner, and we were having drive-by shootings and the like that all kind of partner with the drug trafficking. So to be in a unit that was just out every single night, high speed, working hard on getting those drug dealers off the street corner so that the neighbors could live in peace. Those were exciting times, but that drug dealer was going to be back out on the street 3 days later, and you would probably be chasing him again the next week. Child abuse was very different because you made long-lasting difference in somebody's life.
Yeah. No, I think that's extremely important and extremely powerful. Well, how do you see the police officer role changing in the future, or if it will change, or what new things do you think are going to come about in the next 10 to 15 years?
I promise you it's going to change. It has to change. We have to evolve like every other profession, or else we fail. So I think the areas that will most likely change in policing in the coming decade and beyond will be the continued advances in technology. Every time there are new technological developments, criminals will use it to their benefit, and we use it to ours. I think one of the things that has probably had the most profound impact on policing in the 30 years that I've been here is the advent of the smartphone, in that every single person is now walking around with video cameras and still cameras, and we're getting to see a lot more incidents in policing that, number one, will hold us accountable as it should, and two, give us more insight into what's happening so that we can do better. So I think technology is something that we have to pay attention to. Who would have thought 30 and 40 years ago that we'd be solving the crimes that we're solving today because a hair fell out of someone's scalp, and we can now, through DNA analysis, make almost absolute identification of who that suspect is. It makes you wonder, what are we not doing today that police leaders 15 and 20 years from now are going to say, had they only done this back then? So it's dynamic, it's changing. I would say 20, 30, 40 years ago, the recruiting was focused a lot on the physicality of the job and the physical attributes of those people that were applying. We look much more now at the mental, the academic accomplishments, and the compassion and the ability to interact with others. And so what we're seeing is policing used to be, in my opinion, a job more than a profession, and it drew a certain type of person to it. Today's academy class, when you look at it, you'll have homemakers, people that have raised their family and now want to give back to their community. I've seen cadet classes that have lawyers that have left the active practice of law because they wanted to be a police officer. Had a scientist that left the field of science because they wanted to be a police officer. We've had people that have left the business background. So I think that's the other thing, is we recognize the importance of diversity across all spectrums, not just diversity like we typically think about it as far as like race and ethnic diversity, but just ensuring that you have a diverse police department, men and women that bring very different backgrounds and skills to the organization so that you are that much better for it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So to get into maybe a little more technical, what is that for all the prospective police officers out there, the payment process essentially? How does that work? I know you honestly really depend on your department and stuff like that, but for a new Austin cop, what is their like payment or salary work? What is that structure like?
Sure. So police officer is all a salaried position. If you are a cadet with the Austin Police Department, that is actually a paid position. So you are paid for the 8 months that you are in the academy. All of our salaries are posted online if you want to go and look at that. And so I would encourage anybody that's watching this video that has an interest in policing. First of all, if your interest is monetary, please go somewhere else. I don't want people in this organization that are doing it for the financial compensation, because maybe you'll be able to do the job day in and day out, but that's likely all you're going to do. You're going to meet the minimums. You're not going to go that extra mile. You're not going to care enough about your community, and you're not going to have the passion to do this job the right way. But I also recognize that the economics are important because people have to support themselves and their families and their future. So we are fortunate here in Austin that we are regularly either the top paid or in the top 3 paid police departments in the state. And your salary is set by the meet and confer agreement. So we have a police union, a police association, and we negotiate labor contracts every 3 to 4 years, depending upon the term that the previous contract was negotiated for. And one of the things that's negotiated in that contract is compensation and benefits. And so there is a step progression to where at certain milestones in your career, you're going to receive automatic raises. When you graduate the academy, you will receive an automatic raise.
Mm-hmm.
A year later, another automatic raise. And then you're on a sliding scale. When you hit your 16th year, you will reach your top pay. But then as you promote, realize you step up to the next rung in the ladder. So if you promote, you would get a significant raise. And then the more years you're in that rank, you would get raises along the way. And then if you promote again, that would be another raise. Most officers typically work additional duties as well. They'll have outside security jobs. When you're out and about and maybe you see a police officer working in a retail store, chances are that they are there having been hired on overtime to help provide security to that establishment.
Mm-hmm.
Many officers will have security apartments where they'll have reduced rent to be the security officer for that complex. So there's both the official pay that the organization will give you, and then there's a lot of opportunities to work additional. Because here at the police department in Austin, you work 4 days a week, 4 10-hour shifts as a police officer, and then you'll have 3 days off. So I know many of our officers will work 1 or 2 of those days that they're supposed to have off, and that allows them additional economic opportunity.
Gotcha. So now I kind of break down, where we are today with Corona and so like that. How or in any ways has your role changed, or have you had to have new added activities due to the coronavirus?
COVID-19 has drastically changed policing, just as it has every other industry.
Right.
For a couple of different reasons. Number one, you have to ensure that you're maintaining a healthy and safe workforce so that we can continue to keep our community safe.
Mm-hmm.
And it is so easily transmitted between people as we learn more about this virus that we've had to take dramatic steps to keep our officers safe, but to change how we're doing things. Things like changing response protocols. In the past, if we had a minor crash, both vehicles were drivable, the drivers weren't injured, we would still respond to that scene as a courtesy and provide forms for the drivers to fill out and exchange with each other. Well, that's unnecessary contact right now. That is contact where if one of those citizens was positive for COVID-19, then we have just unnecessarily exposed our officer. Or if our officer is potentially the one that is positive and doesn't know it, could spread that amongst the community. So we've looked at all of the calls, all of the services that we provide, and really cut down on those ones that are non-essential and that do not increase the safety of the community, and we're just not responding to those. I just put in place a week and a half ago the requirement that every police officer, when they are out in the public, now wears a face mask, a surgical mask or a cloth mask, again, to keep the officers safe. You cannot enter a police facility without taking your temperature first, because we want to make sure that you are not positive for COVID-19 and then you're going to spread it amongst the workforce. Mm-hmm. We've seen horrible impacts on police departments across this country. Some of the most notably impacted departments are those in Detroit, New York, and Louisiana, where they have hundreds and hundreds of officers that are at home under quarantine. It's hard to operate your police department if you have 50% of your men and women home under quarantine and you're trying to keep your community safe during these difficult times with half of your workforce. So a lot of what we're doing now is geared towards the safety of our employees so that they can continue to serve and keep the community safe.
Mm-hmm. So do you see any of these changes like staying in effect potentially after COVID-19 ends, or most of them kind of go back to the way it was?
I do think that there will be changes here at the Austin Police Department. We will have had the opportunity for however long we are in this amended response protocol. We'll have data points now to look at and to determine, did that impact overall community safety when we stopped going to crashes? Did it impact the citizen satisfaction when we refused to send an officer to their call because it was something that they could report online through technology, and we're not going to send an officer to that call? So I do think that once we've moved through the pandemic and we work back towards normal operations, that the new normal will be different.
Gotcha. And I know you kind of just touched on it a little bit, but what does it mean for Austin to be a data-driven police department? Like for viewers who maybe not necessarily have an idea about that, like what does that mean for the Austin Police Department in general?
So I believe police departments are, if not the largest, one of the largest repositories of public data in any city structure. We have data on everything, everyone we stop, every crash we go to, every report we write, every ticket we write, every call that goes into the 911 center, all of that data. We have a very robust data analysis division here. We use a business intelligence tool that corporate America might use to track profits and sales and supply chains and all of that. We use it to track crime. When is it occurring? Where is it occurring? Who is committing that? And so we use all of this data so that we ensure that we are using our resources to the best of our abilities. You
Right.
will not find a police department across this country that's ever going to tell you that they have enough police officers. We will always need more. So I have the responsibility of making sure that we're using the officers that we have in those places where we're likely to have the greatest impact on overall community safety. So it's through this data, it's through analyzing the data, producing reports that we can really drive ourselves internally, but then externally. The trust that you have to have within your community is such that we share all of our data with the community so that they can see what's happening with their police department and therefore feel comfortable that we're doing things right or call us out if they think that we're doing things that should be done differently.
Uh-huh. So what are typical community events that, I guess not normal, that other police officers are involved in, that just, newer police officers, what do like the typical community events that they partake in? What does that look like?
So we've got community events across the board. Our district representative division, which is kind of our main community policing division, every officer is a community policing officer and is expected to practice that, but these officers solely focus on that. So they'll go to community meetings with businesses to talk to them about how you can secure your business and be less likely to be victimized by criminals. What can you do to make your business less attractive to someone who's looking to commit crime?
Mm-hmm.
We have commander forums where the commander for each bureau around the city will hold meetings once a month or once a quarter, depending upon the area in Austin, to bring in the community and to explain to them what's happened the past quarter, what trends are we seeing with crime, where can the community help us, but most importantly, to be there to answer the questions that the community may have. We interact across many different divisions. We've got an Office of Community Liaison that has individual liaisons for some of our smaller community groups here in Austin, such as our immigrant community, our African American community, our LGBTQ community. So we've got liaisons that work specifically in each one of these communities so that they have confidence in their police department, that we can hear their concerns and that we can provide information directly to them.
Right. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I have two final questions. One, could you just kind of touch on what the organizational hierarchy kind of is in the police department, essentially? I know we talked about officers and then detectives, but where does it go from there?
Sure. So when you start with the Austin Police Department, if you're coming in as a police officer, that's where you start as a police officer on patrol, working the streets. And then after a few years, you can move into other assignments at the officer level.
Right.
But for promotion purposes, the first promotion would be to the corporal detective position. It's an equal level position. The detectives are the ones that we talked about earlier that work caseloads and investigations. The corporal is out on the street on patrol and kind of helps their supervisor run the shift.
Gotcha.
So the next promotion would be to the rank of sergeant, and that's our first line supervisor. Sergeants are typically running a patrol shift on the street or running one of the investigative units. The next promotable rank is the lieutenant rank. That's kind of mid-level management, overseeing a larger piece of the organization.
Gotcha.
The next rank is commander, and I currently have 18 commanders that each run a different division within the department. And that's the final rank that you can test for is commander. After that, the ranks are appointed. And then the appointed rank would be an assistant chief. I have 6 assistant chiefs, one of whom serves as my chief of staff, which is the next rank up, and then it's police chief.
Gotcha. Well, perfect. And then our final question, to not take too much of your time, is if you could look back 20, 30 years ago and give one piece of advice back to yourself then, what would be that token line you would give?
You don't know everything that you think you know.
Uh-huh.
Be very open-minded. This is a dynamic career. There's so much to learn, and just be a sponge as a new officer and take in everything all of the senior officers are trying to tell you, because I promise you it'll come in handy at some point. And to those of you that actually join this career, take notes along the way so that when you're 30 years into your career and people want to know your funny stories, you can still remember them, because sometimes you forget along the way.
Well, thank you very much, Chief. We really appreciate it. That was a lot of good stuff. And tune in next week for our next participant in this. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jay.